Welcome to 60 Minutes with a Woman, the podcast where we sit down with remarkable women. In each episode, we dive into their journey, the challenges, the triumph, and the lessons that shape them. Get ready for raw conversations, inspiring stories, and actionable insights to fuel your own success. Tune in because every woman's story deserves to be heard. Welcome to 60 Minutes with a Woman. Today, I have the pleasure to have Chavisa Horemans. Chavisa, you hold a master's degree in social sciences and a diploma in adult education. You are today a certified divorce and empowerment coach with a specialization in relationship breakdowns, high conflicts disputes, gender-based violence, hidden abuse, financial abuse, parenting challenges, post separation abuse, and related health challenges. You work with people who have experienced trauma and are living with trauma. You are the owner of The Mothers Corp, which provides one-on-one confidential, personalized, virtual divorce and empowerment coaching to women going through complex challenges. It's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
Chavisa, let's let's get to know the woman behind the title. Tell us more about where you grew up, what were your early influences?
I feel so fortunate that when my family emigrated to Canada, they brought us to the ocean. So I was very fortunate to be raised uh, in Vancouver, right near the ocean. And so I think we spent a lot of time enjoying the natural world, a lot of hiking, a lot of like hiking in meadows and seeing wildflowers, and a lot of seeing gardens. And then, of course, I turned into a teenager and I became more interested in the mall for a period of time. But the natural world really set a precedent for me as a space to really connect to the earth and find a lot of restoration and spiritual sustenance.
So you were aware already as a young person of some sort of holistic healing to nature.
I think it was just pretty and I enjoyed it, but we were in it a lot, like we were always walking in the woods and spending time with trees and hanging out in creeks. And so it was just it was part of the normal world we grew up in.
That sounds like a dream childhood. I love it. I'm very close to nature too. And I grew up as a city girl, and I can tell you, I knew something was missing each time I was going to my grandparents' house. I had this beautiful backyard, and we had a lot of butterflies. And I remember I was just like all day long outside. So that was my little escape time. I loved it. So I'm glad you had such a beautiful childhood. And tell me more about what were your early inspirations, what kind of students you were, and what really motivated you as a young person.
I was really fortunate that I loved creative expression, and was able to get into a school that advanced fine arts and allowed for a really smart creative expression, and that celebrated that and advanced that. So I had a really good trajectory when I went to a specialized school in high school.
That's wonderful. And did you already know what you wanted to do when you grew up?
Oh, well, like that's the joke. It's hilarious. I wanted to be a typewriter repair person, they don't exist anymore, or a bus driver. That's what my grade 5 self wanted to be.
A typewriter repair person. This is the first time I hear this. My grandparents used to have one. I loved it. But how come?
Well, when I was little, I loved the technicality of it and like the ribbons, and there was like so much ornateness and so much like technical stuff that you could get in and fix. And I think that was probably my creativity. Like I just loved working with my hands.
That is adorable. And bus driver. How come?
I think because I probably had a sweet bus driver when I was young, and they just imprinted on me that they were kind people and thoughtful.
I love it. You know what? It's very true when you have somebody who inspires you, regardless of what they do, you really look up to them.
Especially when you're little.
Absolutely, I agree, completely agree. So what happened then? Because you're not right now a typing machine repair person or a bus driver. Tell me more.
Probably the world changed and we became a global urban center. And I loved getting educated, and I ended up doing my master's degree and really enjoying studying and learning. And I ended up working at universities and law firms and health authorities. And so, I took a different trajectory. And right now, it combines beautifully into the work I do. So I'm super happy with where I've landed.
So you were an employee before and now you have your own business. Did you always have this entrepreneur mindset?
I always had a dream that I would have my own business, but it wasn't something I pursued for many years. And then, but it was always kind of niggling at the back of my mind that that's part of what I wanted as part of my self realization.
It's is it the independence of the field of being having your own business, or is it more because you have a creative side and you wanted to be able to implement maybe a little bit of what you felt was necessary in the business rather than following maybe the protocol or the rules of a company?
Well, both. I think having your own business is really dynamic. So, there's always like so many facets that you can be thinking about. So, it's very intellectually dynamic. But the other piece is that you can actually achieve your vision. And you know, for me, I set out to fill a service gap. There's a real need in the population that I work with that there be more services, and I wanted to attend to that and fill a gap by creating a service that would better support people going through complexity. And so I'm able to do that. And so it's just a matter of like getting the business out into the world so that more people are aware that this is available to them. So I think it uses all of those things that you mentioned.
So when did you decide that you didn't want to work for a company anymore and you just took the leap of starting something on your own?
Definitely in the last decade. So I'd had my own personal experience, which really illuminated for me that there's high need in this area. And so, slowly over time, it was like I was doing this as individual experiences and side projects. And then the side projects were growing and I was helping more people. And then more people were saying, you should do this. And it almost felt like it was gaining momentum and getting enough support where people are like, you should do this full time. And so eventually, like the circumstances came together where that made good sense as a option.
I mean, when we had our first conversation last time, I told you how I started this podcast and how much of a momentum and divine moment it was because I wasn't drawn to becoming a podcast host at all. But when you have this aha moment and everything converge into telling you, all right, this is what you're supposed to do, well, this energy and mega vibration exists permanently in your brain, and there's just no way to escape that. Now this has become your mission, and I can absolutely relate to you on that. I want to ask you what kind of side job you were talking about.
So, I mean, I was working for a health authority and I was doing my regular job in health research and health policy. And then I kept getting sent women who are in really precarious situations that needed support. And so I started giving out my number, and people would just start calling me, and more people started calling me. And I helped more and more people advance their safety and wellness and how to emotionally process the complexity they were in and how to navigate the space. And then that is the kind of beautiful work where you feel like you're really contributing to the world and that your soul is alive. And so I was like, oh, you know what? That's what I want to do for all my time. I didn't particularly get that sort of beautiful resonance when I had a job.
That's wonderful. Everybody's looking for this emotional reward when you wake up in the morning and you do something you really want it to be meaningful. And it's even better when you know that you made a difference in someone's life who really needed it. Last time when we talked, this is the first thing that transpired from you, and this energy. You said many times that you were doing this out of love, and it's I couldn't wait to interview you for that reason, because when you have somebody who's willing to fight for you so hard, you need to be known. People need to know about you, and I'm glad you're here today. And this is going to bring me to my next question, because people, we introduced you, but can you tell us more about the business you started?
So I run the Mother Corp, which is a trauma-informed coaching and consultancy. I am a trauma-informed divorce and empowerment coach. So I work with people through the whole trajectory, from when they're having sort of a relationship rupture or some challenges, or perhaps there's been a trauma that's occurred and they're not sure what they're doing, and we'll try and see if we can repair the relationship. I'm very happy to work with folks who want to repair. And then sometimes people have made a firm decision and then they just need help going through the process. And then sometimes people find themselves in the middle of the process of divorce and it's much more complicated than they'd ever anticipated. And so they need some support there, or they're dealing with abuse and post separation abuse. So perhaps they've even achieved their divorce, but now they're experiencing a lot of abuse afterwards. And so I work with people through the whole spectrum of this space, and I help people increase their safety and wellness. So often, the space that I work in, people have either experienced trauma or they're experiencing trauma. And so, wherever there's trauma, there's grieving. So, it often brings up big feeling states. And so, when I work with people, I help them with emotional, logistical, and practical aspects of support, so that they have sort of a wraparound care as they're going through this. And of course, for people who are in more complicated situations, what often happens is that family and friends fall away. It's like really hard to stay with somebody who's going through a 4-year divorce. Like, it's really hard for people to understand, like, why is this system taking so long? Why is this
Absolutely.
system so complicated? What's going on there? So what happens is often friends and family fall away. And so people can become quite isolated or depleted. And that's exactly where I want to love these people. I don't want people feeling isolated and alone. I'm understand this terrain. I'm very comfortable loving people in this terrain. And so what I do, at the kernel of what I do, is accompany people through hardship so that they're able to get through hardship and then start to rebuild the aspects and the foundation that they need for the next chapter of their lives. And of course, when we're rebuilding our lives in the next chapter of our lives, it's an enormous amount of work. But if we do it with intentionality and thoughtfulness and some consciousness, then we can produce a really beautiful trajectory forward. And so, of course, that's what I want, because it has such a beautiful ripple out effect. You help one person and then it ripple out to their kids, and it has such a nice trajectory. So when I go to bed at night, I'm like, oh man, like I helped, this person, and it had a nice ripple out to their kids. And so I feel really positive about the work I do, that I'm able to get so much benefit from it.
And the thing also is that you just talked about postpartum when it comes to divorce and grieving, and still feeling abused. And I, in my mind, think immediately when you were talking about it, I thought about, yes, but you don't even know who you are anymore. And this is what allows also all this negative energy to take over your own being, because you were for so long partnering with somebody and walking the same path, and you compromise and you go on with life and you grow, right? You age with this person and your goals change, and all of a sudden you separate. And financially also, you can be linked in some sort of way, financially to your partner. And then all of a sudden you find yourself going through a difficult time, right? That is very demanding emotionally. And you end up feeling alone, although you know that this relationship was not really good for you, just because, once again, it's just you've been separated from what you knew. So the divorce itself takes a long time, and as long as you can focus on the logistic part of it, because what you're trying to do is separate yourself from the contract you sign, basically, right? But at the same time, I think people don't realize that they need assistance then more than just that. It's not just about hiring a lawyer, right, and getting this through. It's about everything else that is involved in getting in a divorce.
So the way I articulate it is that the reason why divorce as a process is so overwhelming is because there's actually 4 or 5 divorces happening simultaneously. There's an emotional divorce, there's a social divorce, there's a financial divorce, there's the legal divorce, which involves discourse that we're not very comfortable with or knowledgeable about. And then often it's impacts our workplaces. And so it's like instead of taking a vacation and recuperating, you're spending your time doing legal paperwork. So you're not getting that kind of space to restore yourself that you would have had. And so because there's so many different types of change going uh, at that time, then people really do benefit from having more support. And that's where I come in, is that I help people have someone who's accompanying them. And I try and meet with the people I work with, basically whatever cadence makes sense for them. So, if they're in a reasonable situation, then I'll meet with them once a week so that they have a touch point that they can process through. But if somebody's in a much more critical situation, I'll meet with them more frequently just so we can get them moving forward and stabilized.
So tell me more about the reason why you picked divorce and you decided to focus all your energy on helping people and women who are going through a divorce.
I had the good fortune of doing my master's degree and getting a graduate diploma. And then I'd been working at universities and law firms and working for health organizations. And then I had my own experience of gender-based violence during really awful divorce and post-separation abuse. And so what I did during that time is I made use of my professional skills to increase my safety and to get through enormous complexity. And in that time, it became clear to me that there's not enough resources here, and that actually people are almost invisibilized in this space. That, like the average person, if you tell them you're going through a really hard time, they'll say something like, "You need a good lawyer." And it's like, yes, you need a good lawyer, but it's way more complicated than that.
It's true.
And so what we actually need is people who can stay with us and accompany us through challenges. And so what I do is I provide a really realistic service where it's not a fantasy that it's all going to work out. It's like, hey, this is the train you're navigating. Sometimes it goes like this, sometimes it goes like this. I'll stay with you through whatever happens. And so maybe we're going to be celebrating a win, and maybe we're going to be grieving. And this is the terrain that we're going to be navigating. And so I'm really realistic with people so that they know, like, at least they have accompaniment through what's really going to happen. Because oftentimes, it's like you have your autonomous life and you're used to doing things on your own. But then once you go through the courts, there's other decision making happening. And sometimes that decision making is outside of your control. So then it brings in, a whole host of different feelings around powerlessness. And you're doing the best you can and you're trying to position yourself, but really maybe you do have some decision making and maybe you don't have some decision making. It just depends on what the process is. And so to have someone who will stay with you and be like, you know what, whatever happens, I'll accompany you. And like I just try and be realistic with people so that they have the support they need no matter what's going on.
So your passion and your vocation right now comes from your own experience.
My own experience plus my academic skills plus I've done a ton of research on this. And so all my work is holistic and evidence-based. So I'm like the one who reads UN papers and UN reports for fun, and I read Supreme Court legal cases for fun. I'm not a lawyer or a therapist or a financial planner, but these days, because I work with folks who are experiencing trauma, I'm also certified in holistic trauma recovery. And so we know people who are going through especially hard or bad divorces are experiencing trauma as they're going through family litigation. So these days, in addition to working with individuals, I also train family lawyers on trauma-informed practices and trauma recovery. I also train counselors and psychotherapists on high conflict divorces so that we can get more resources and more trauma-informed practices to people who are, we know, going through trauma in these spaces.
That should go hand in hand together if you think about it, not just focusing on the legal part, but once again on everything that surrounds it. And this is going to bring me to my next question because you started to give us a little glimpse of your practice, and it's very interesting because it combines three practices. Actually, you combine dispute resolution with holistic trauma recovery and energy work all together. Can you tell us a little more? And first of all, what drew you to this kind of work and also what it encompasses?
So, what I wanted to do was provide a wraparound service to take care of people meaningfully, right? So, there's the one thing around being able to accompany people through divorce. But divorce, like I said, tends to be traumatic. So, the holistic trauma recovery is really important to look after the whole person. And then, of course, trauma recovery is often very energetic because when we experience trauma, it can be emotional, physical, social, mental, and spiritual. So we need to take care of the whole person. And so energy work supports with that. And so oftentimes, what I'll do is I'll work with clients where some of the sessions, I'll give you two examples, but some of the
Okay.
sessions are like left brain logic, discussing through problems, processing them. And then complemented by the next session that will be like energy work and restoration and keeping them grounded and settled. Because with somatic practices, we can support regulation in the body, right? The more you're grounded and regulated, the better you're going to be able to think, negotiate, process, problem solve. So the more somatic practices we do and the more holistic fundamental self-care we do, the better we can look after ourselves while we're going through adversity and the better we can withstand all the pressures and challenges that we're dealing with. So I always try and look after the whole person. And so that I integrate that into the work I do. So like if you and I were having a 1 hour session together, we would take care of the external problems that you're dealing with and the complexity, but we'd also take care of your inner self care because you're the one that has to withstand these forces, and we want you to thrive.
So you're basically reinforcing um, the personality and the strength of the person you're working with so they can go to battle with more tools and more peace of mind of what they want.
So there's lots and lots of opportunities. Like we have to look after ourselves if we want to stay in good relationship with ourselves. We have to look after ourselves, right? Like if you're going through a long stressor, it's imperative that you eat and eat nutrient rich food, right? Like it's imperative that you sleep. So how do we stay grounded and well? But also, like I said, divorce brings up all this emotional change. And so a divorce in its nature is a emotional relationship rupture. So that's traumatic. And so it brings up a lot of big feeling states. And so we need to figure out how to comfortably process and safely process anger and rage and sorrow and despair and grieving and like how to do that in a safe way. And I feel for a lot of females, we haven't been enculturated like what's a safe way to express your anger. And so I work with women around how they can do safe expression of anger so that they can clear feelings from their bodies in a safe way so that they can look after themselves fundamentally. And so I feel like in the process of complexity and hardship, we're also doing enormous skill building, like to learn to befriend anger or how to work with anger is a huge skill. You know, that's a skill that you will use for the rest of your life. That's a skill like that's really important to teach your kids how to have safe, healthy expression of anger. And so they have enormous value to learn these kind of skill sets, and they have a long-standing value once you've gathered those skills.
Uh, how do you create a safe space for women to be okay with being angry, afraid, and just overall um having this feeling that they've been betrayed? This is what I'm going to where I want to go with this. Is this feeling of betrayal that really kind of creates this anger that takes you nowhere? How do you tame this feeling? Because this is the first thing you feel during a divorce, especially when it's a divorce that is difficult because your partner is not willing to work on you with this.
So I work with people however they present. So my service is completely personalized. So in your example, it's like whatever the feeling state that presents. But there's safe ways to do anger and there's unsafe ways to do anger. It's important that we allow our feelings to come through. And I think part of what the power of being human and the power of being a human adult is to learn to get familiar with these feeling states and befriend them, and so you're comfortable with digesting and metabolizing them. So whatever the big feeling is, holding space for it, processing it, speaking about it, figuring out practices or rituals that you can use so that you can safely navigate it and digest it.
You speak also about confidentiality, and I really wanted to ask you, why is this important in your work?
Confidentiality, I mean, often the folks I'm working with have experienced abuse. So there's a tenderness there for sure, and there's safety considerations. So confidentiality is critical in that regard. And also, this is very much a space of trust. And people are sharing with you like their tender underbellies, their very tender parts of their lives. And so confidentiality is part of how we set up the container so that people feel safe. I want to work with people where they can safely talk about whatever it is they're grappling with, and so that they can show up and have support whole. And so that means we bring our whole selves. And so confidentiality helps ensure that. But I also put in tech aspects like my email comes through Switzerland, it's end to end encrypted. And that's really important too, because we want to make sure that, we don't have any data issues. So I do a lot of protocols to make sure that there's a lot of safety considerations. And that just kind of helps people feel that they've been seen, heard, considered, that I understand the sensitivities of this terrain and that I'm responding to them adequately.
Absolutely. Wow. It's incredible that you're taking confidentiality this seriously, sorry, because people really feel that they can trust you, and it's very important during a difficult time such as a divorce. And you talked earlier about postpartum abuse. Can you tell us a little more? What does that look like?
So I'll unpack that word for you. So the word postpartum generally responds to the time after a woman has had a baby. So that's like one of the terms you would hear frequently is like postpartum depression. And so that's a different thing. So what I'm speaking about is post separation abuse. So that's the area that I specialize in. And sometimes those two go together. So, like, we'll have a new mom who's having a struggle and experiencing some postpartum challenges. And then that could potentially, experience a trauma or a rupture in the relationship that maybe there's some abuse happening. So sometimes they tee in together. The space that I specialize in is post separation abuse. And post separation abuse is where a person has decided to leave a relationship and then the abuse escalates. So maybe there wasn't abuse happening in the relationship, not like overt abuse, but then the when the person has decided to leave, then it escalates. So sometimes we'll see that as like financial abuse or high complexity with the kids or high complexity with shared assets or high complexity in the courts. Those are some examples. So those are the spaces that I'm used to navigating with people so that they can have support while they're navigating immense complexity.
I want to ask you a question, and we haven't talked about it, but this is from my personal curiosity. You know, very often when couples decide to separate, children are obviously in the middle of everything, and sometimes they are used as weapons against, the other parents. Um, how do you work with that? Because this is for me one of the trickiest situation. They're innocent, they are obviously victim of what's happening, and they are forced to sometimes choose a preferred or favorite parents over the other one in the midst of everything.
So I do a lot of work with parents who are dealing with parenting conflict of this nature. And so, again, I bring holistic evidence based work. So I'm watching from the UN down in terms of how their recommendations are for how to attend this kind of sabotage. And of course, to my mind, like we have to center the best interest of the child. And what's in the best interest of the child is that they have loving adults who take care of them.
Yes.
So, if we center the kid and their best interests, then, you know, one would hope, but it doesn't always happen, that this kind of abuse uh, is addressed adequately. And I feel like we're in a day and age where there's some systems in place to address this kind of abuse, but to my mind, they remain insufficient. And the thing is, for people who indeed love their children, to have their children harmed in this way is so painful. Again, it produces that kind of emotional, spiritual, mental trauma that, takes an enormous toll. And I sit with a lot of people in that space grieving. In fact, those are some of my um, the clients I love the most, is looking after people while they're navigating enormous complexity and their hearts are, being stretched unfathomably.
Do you work with your client, including the partner and the children together, or your client and their children, or do you work specifically with the client and teach, mainly because you work with women, the mother, how to navigate this and how to express her feelings to her partner she is currently arguing with because of the divorce?
So I tend to work with one person. On occasion, I will work with couples. If there is com- a strong energy of a desire to repair with both of them, and that's like a felt sense, that desire to address rupture. um, but usually I tend to work with one person, and then when I work with one person, if they are indeed a parent, then I help them navigate both conflict with their partner or ex-partner. I help them communicate effectively with their professional team, including their lawyers and their um, therapists, and I also help them navigate communication to stay connected and bonded with their children. So I tend to basically everything they're presenting with.
Okay. I was asking you this question because a friend of mine, she's also from Canada, by the way, and she's in Montreal, and she went through a divorce, a difficult one. It was a while ago, but something that happened, and it really was difficult for me to just give her any type of advice or tip because her three daughters sided with the father. Reason being, she was the one who initiated the divorce, so everybody was blaming her. And although she tried to explain the reasons why she wasn't happy in this relationship anymore, and what got her to that point, the victim mentality of her husband not wanting to change but not wanting to let her go, and then the children's perception of her breaking an actual family was so heavy on her heart, and she kind of gave up a little bit about her children. She said, that's fine. If you want to go with your father, you just go. And this is what the daughters did, which led her to a very solo, difficult, and time where she was depressed.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a very, very sad situation.
She did a lot of healing, over time. She went to monastery, she went to a lot, but I think that her not finding any support anywhere around her, and her children, mainly also because she wanted to be a better mom for her children, but then her children not wanting to see any of that, not wanting their mother's happiness, and focusing only on, once again, who they thought was the victim. It was just difficult, really.
It sounds like a very difficult scenario. And I mean, divorce is a rupture and it changes people's lives, and especially it changes the configuration of kids' lives. And then partly it's like, how do you have the emotional capacity and wherewithal to digest and metabolize those kind of big seismic changes?
Yes.
And, everybody takes a unique path. And there's a lot to be said for figuring out safe expression of big feelings and learning how to deal with the grieving and the sadness and the sorrow and the challenges of change that may or may not be wanted. And, everybody navigates and negotiates that in a different way.
I wish I knew you back then. I would have recommended you to her. Now, obviously, on 60 Minutes with a Woman, hopefully, if you know somebody who is in this situation or a similar situation, you now are able to, first of all, know that help exists, right? Because not everybody knows. And then, just ask for help. I want to ask you something. Once again, it's a little off topic, but what can you give us one tip in a situation, once again, where the mother is trying to fight for her own freedom, needs happiness, and this includes sometimes, getting in a divorce, and how can she communicate what is going on with her children so they can understand and empathize also with this with the situation?
I mean, when it comes, it just, I mean, that question is so broad because it depends on the age of the children and their developmental stage. I think it's really important to affirm that you love people and that, you love the person, and sometimes the behaviors, may or may not sit well with you. Like the kid can love their parent, but not be in agreement with their behavioral choices. So, but I don't think I can answer that question sufficiently because it's so broad. But I can give you two tips around how to navigate this space. And the first would be trust your intuition. We are picking up a ton of information, and it's really important to befriend yourself and trust your intuition. And the second is that part of human relationships is negotiation, and I'll give you some examples. Can you pass the salt? That's negotiation. Do you want to hang out on Thursday night and go for coffee? That's negotiation. A divorce is a messy, complicated negotiation. And so learning to negotiate and get comfortable with negotiation is a really important skill set because that's what we're doing together.
I love it. I love the fact that you are pointing out the fact that negotiation is part of our lives. It's only when it doesn't benefit us or when it hurts us that it becomes complicated for us to navigate through the situation. And I appreciate the fact that you're also treating children as human beings who also are in the negotiation and are negotiating, and we negotiate with them, because I have never thought about it that way. You would think that it's just endless love, and that parenting is this beautiful bliss that everybody is, and everything is supposed to be easy as you can expect it to be, and it's actually not. And I love also the fact that you reinforce the self confidence and trusting your guts, because at the end of the day, indeed, being okay and feeling aligned with yourself will resonate with your children at a moment or another. Maybe not right now because they need the time to process as well, and they're going through their own grieving their own way, but then at some point it would all make sense.
The invitation I think we have as humans is to befriend our feeling states, to understand that we're negotiating so we get comfortable with that space, that we're taking in a lot of information, and to trust our intuitions. And also that there's a real art, and especially in the line of work that I do, there's a real art to digest and metabolize hardship and digest and metabolize trauma. Even some of my clients won't even talk to me about divorce. They just want to talk about their relationship to themselves, looking after themselves better, developing a stronger relationship to themselves, and digesting and metabolizing past experiences that they've had, or patterns or complexity. And so, as we have the bravery and strength and investment to befriend feeling states and digest and metabolize, then we are developing an arsenal of skills, and those give us really good capacity going forward. And so, partly, I think like what I like to do is I work with people. I'm not pro divorce, I'm not attached. I just help people with the decisions that they're autonomously making. And then, if they do proceed with a divorce and they are rebuilding the next foundation for their lives, like, often they don't want to repeat what they've had in the past. So then again, we need to have more self care, more ability to comfortably negotiate, because oftentimes we hope for ourselves that we'll have a healthy relationship if we haven't had a healthy relationship in the past. And so, when we learn to negotiate and we learn early communication skills, then ideally we can be mindful of those early red flags so that we don't repeat a relationship like the one we've come out of, and that we can improve our relational interactions into the future.
That's wonderful. And tell me more about the energy work you do. So you mentioned that you're so energy, how do you, for those who are not familiar with it, how do you integrate energy work with trauma recovery?
They're totally connected, because trauma is often a spiritual wound. If something if there's been a rupture, then it's often will have a emotional and spiritual impact. And so, when we take care of I'm trained in a beautiful holistic trauma recovery. That's a very beautiful guided meditation. So basically, it attends to spiritual and core wounds. So that's one piece of it. And then also, like, energetically, I am trained in Jikiden Reiki, which is the Japanese Reiki form, and I also do intuitive healing. So I have beautiful gifts in that regard, where I can like help people open their hearts. And of course, when we're going through hardship and we're sort of looking after ourselves and bracing, or protecting ourselves, to be able to keep opening the heart is a real gift. It changes how we interact with people. And also, we're energetic beings, right? So the more grounded and aligned and wholesome we are, um, then we have more energy, right? And the more life force energy we have, then we have more capacity to take care of the things we have to take care of, including the complexity that we have to navigate. So I do a lot of somatic practice and help people get grounded. It's based in um, neurobiology. And so I combine like somatics and energy work and intuitive healing. And I just help people get grounded so that they have the energy they need to do what they need to do, whatever that is.
I love the idea of life is a cycle, and I love the idea of recycling trauma for to feed actually better energies. All right, it's you talked about the Japanese practices, and I always see it as the yin and the yang being always present, present inside of us, around us, and then circling and getting recycled infinitely. And sometimes when it's not recycled, it's because we're not doing the proper work of decomposing this trauma to you know allow it to sprout and then bloom into something more beautiful. um I try on my own enormously to work on those things. I think that I haven't acquired the stillness of the mind I need for that. I have to practice and be maybe surrounded with in an environment or ask for help to find a way to ground myself. My ideas and my brain is always going all over. So I think that it's a beautiful way of people should most definitely work on that more than what we do right now. This is definitely something I believe in. And there is something else that you've been doing. And this really kind of uh, not triggered me, but I really wanted to learn more about it because you're certified in trauma of money.
I'm in the process of it. So, I work with people who are having really high conflict divorces. And so often where there's gender-based violence, there's financial abuse happening. It's like 95% of the time. And so partly to navigate that space, but also we live in capitalism. So we're raised as small people experiencing or starting a familial relationship with money. And so trauma of money kind of unpacks our family of origin and our relationships with money. And then it also looks at like our current practices and like sort of where they come from. It's integrates neurobiology, so it looks at how we respond to certain things. And so it can help people process and reposition themselves so that they have more capacity and skills. So I'm just in the middle of that certification, but it complements in all the other work that I do beautifully. And I always try and do my work, like I said, holistic, evidence based. So this unpacking of money relationships based in neurobiology framework makes good sense to me because that's a lot of the work I do. And I just wanted to circle back onto your last comment, and that's that I think what you're getting at is this like idea of composting, right? It's like we take an experience and break it down and then compost it. And then hopefully the soil gets richer and we can build something beautiful from it. And that's exactly what I want to do is help people process through the experience they're having and then rebuild the next chapter that's going to be very beautiful and thriving for them.
That's absolutely it. Yes, I said decomposing and then recycle it. It's composting. Indeed, it's true because I, over time, I mean, I do a lot of introspections and personal work, just on life in general. You know, sometimes when you just want to hit your head against the wall and you're like, "Ugh, why are we here for?" And we're trying to find a reason. And when you realize that there is the reason, it's because once again you're not composting and basically I like to say decompose because sometimes it's I like the process of breaking down something so it becomes small particles that you can't even identify what it is anymore, and then its aspect changes and it becomes indeed compost, sorry, and it feeds because it's full of nutrients right now, something that's more beautiful, and this beautiful thing is you. um I always love this idea because, you know, one day I heard that it doesn't matter, you know, if you plant a seed and you don't have the right environment for it, it will never grow. And it's not about the problem is not the seed, the problem is not the plant. Sometimes it's really the environment. And when you think about creating the right environment for you, so you can sprout and bloom, it just makes absolute sense with energy work, healing trauma, and like you mentioned, rebuilding your self-esteem, metabolizing anger. It's something that we don't talk about enough, and it seems very logical, right? Because you're like, this is not healthy, so I have to get out of here. But the process and the way of doing it really requires somebody like you who knows how to help you navigate and not get lost in the midst of um, just this emotional tornado you're in, right? And when we talked about the trauma of money, I felt that it was going even beyond the divorce, like you mentioned. Money is something that children don't understand. They're born and they love to play, have fun, spend time with their family, eat, have a good time, nap, and vice versa. And then all of a sudden we have to help them understand why they can't waste water, why they can't waste this, or why they have to be mindful of this, or why they cannot purchase that because it has a value, and vice versa. And I think that we are not trained to train actually children to understand and live in a healthy way with money. You have people who once again have bad credit because they overspent and this and that. There's a relationship, or they will or they're very frugal because they're always afraid of lacking of money, right? And they don't realize that this is also a trauma to work on. So I love, you're the first person I have ever met who talked to me about money trauma of money certification. Sorry. Tell me more about what does the training look like? What do you guys talk about during the certification,
So
the
what I really
classes?
enjoy about it so far is that they've brought in a lot of brilliant minds to discuss from various angles. And so, but it's very, again, holistic. And so it tends to neurobiology, somatics, intellectual parts, behaviors, what scarcity looks like, what trauma looks like, what the impact of poverty looks like, what the impact of disruptive relationships or manipulative relationships, and how these kind of can produce an imprint that produce behaviors long into the future. So when we look at our early initiation into money and money relationships and money, um, like how it's situated, whether it was a manipulation or whether it was a generously provided or where there was insufficiency, it has a resonant effect. And so it's just unpacking that space so we can have more compassion about how we come to our decisions and how we can navigate without perhaps our subconscious causing some interference.
And money creates also social disparities. And this is also something that is very difficult for children to understand and then adults to cope with. It's just that you understand that the more you have, the better you should feel about yourself. Yet it's not really true. So navigating through that is top tier subject.
So that's part of what I do in the work that I do is when I'm doing education around trauma and trauma recovery is that I discuss prevalence. And part of the prevalence is that trauma is something that happens to us humans and that it's pretty prevalent and that it affects all social classes. And so basically, you can't acquire enough resources that you won't have the experience of trauma.
Wow, that was powerful, Shavisa. That was very powerful.
Yeah, and so that's interesting to know, and but also, things like poverty produce its own kind of trauma, right? A long sustained trauma. And so just to kind of sit in a thoughtful way with the experiences we've had and how they impact us and how we can make the implicit explicit so that we can become aware and processed and conceptualized, and we can, instead of more subconsciously doing a trajectory, we can intentionally produce the path that we intend to take. And I think a lot of it is around getting in touch with your ethics and values. Like, what is the impact you want to make? Like, I know I go to bed happiest at night when I know I've done really good work. And when I help one person, it has a ripple out effect to their kids. It's so pleasing for me. And I also know that, I have a lot of benevolence in me. Like, that's something I really value, is to work in a very generous way, and that supporting people is something that is a core value for me. So, I receive a lot of affirmation in the work that I do. I absolutely love working in this terrain, helping people navigate complexity and hardship. And, like, I called a client of mine this week. We hadn't talked in some time, and she almost cried on the phone, and she said, "You were the only one who stayed with me." Like, at that point, her family and friends had all left. Nobody could understand what she was in. She was completely overloaded, and she's like, "You're the only one who stayed with me." That's the space of, like, someone very special, right? That's like a doula, or like, you remember when you gave birth, who was in the room, right? And it's like, these kind of hard situations are also like a trajectory where you remember who showed up for you and you remember who accompanied you. And that's like my absolute pleasure and happiness to work with people and help them get into better spots.
And I love that about you. Now I want to ask you a question. You've helped a lot of people, and obviously you get the best of it because, like you mentioned, this is a real fuel for your own happiness. However, how do you still make space for yourself and your own recovery?
Well, I absolutely love this work. Like, this is my dream coming true, right? So, like, I'm amazed with this. And then, like I said, I live in close proximity to the ocean. I have a very holistic practice myself. So it's like I go to the ocean, I work with my clients, I go to the ocean, I get restored. Like, I feel like I'm in a symbiotic relationship where I'm constantly tapping into the natural world as a source of energizing so that I can do the work I do. And I absolutely love it. So I feel like I've got a really good ebb and flow that works really well for me.
This is going back to what you mentioned. It's about self discovery and your true value and what you really need to feel better about yourself in life, right? Not the consumer society that tries to sell you things all the time, but what do you need inside? And you found it. So you're able to regenerate, this energy infinitely for your just your daily life. And that's awesome. I know a lot of us still have a long way to go on this. And I love nature also. I don't go as often as I would like to, but I know there is magnetic intense power to nature, and if you're in tune to it, it's like plugging the plug and then getting your battery recharge. It's that effective,
Mhm.
absolutely. And tell me more about your clients. You mentioned that she really almost had a moment where she realized that she it's not almost she had a moment where she realized that you were the only one there for her. Do you sometimes start working with your clients on a topic that they brought up for your first consultation and ended up going way further in the discovery and the layers of the trauma they have?
Just out of respect for people and again to set up that safe container, what I'm doing is I'm offering a free consultation call, and that's just kind of like a high level overview of the situation that they're dealing with. I don't want to get into things that are going to be really upsetting for folks or triggers for folks because it's a smaller space. But once we get into sessions, then they're welcome to bring up whatever. So it's totally personalized. So they can talk about whatever they want to process. So if they want to process an experience or a history or what they're grappling with or a complexity or a system issue or a whatever they're dealing with is what we work on together. So each session is totally tailored.
I like the approach because they also get to know you more, and you guys are building this trustful bond where everybody feels, like you mentioned, safe to share about each other. And it's always when you're not pushing people that they feel once again safe enough to share more things that the subconscious didn't even let them access prior to a consultation of that nature. Do you What would you say to somebody who needs help and doesn't know about it? What kind of how would you tell them to take the shot and start working on finding a way to improve themselves?
So, well, from where I work, it's always better to start earlier. Like, the earlier we can start, the more we can problem solve and navigate and make informed decisions. So ideally, we can lessen the impact and the extent of the trauma. So I am always happy to hear from people as soon as possible. And then the other piece is, we just work with people exactly where they are, right? So sometimes things are massively escalated, and oftentimes I mean, you said it earlier, people are usually like, I could have used you a year ago, 5 years ago. Like it takes time to find good resources. So part of why I'm happy to talk to you is just because it lets more people know about resources that may be beneficial to them. And always we know someone who could use a hand, or and part of like how I think about this is like we alleviate weight out of the network. Like if I'm worried about my friend and I can't support them and I can give them a good resource, then I took care of them and I don't have to overextend myself. So I try and take weight out of the network. Then, like I was saying earlier, like I train counselors and psychotherapists on high conflict divorce, and they send their clients to me. So again, I'm taking weight out of the network. So at the end of the day, what we want to do is take people who need something and give them the right resources that can meaningfully support them through that. And I'm more than happy to hear from folks. And I always, in my comp calls, make sure that we're a good fit because I always want to be highly effective with the people that I work with. I always want to see them increase their safety and wellness. And when I say safety and wellness, it's always wholesome. Like it's the big picture of what wellness includes. It includes housing. It includes earning enough money that you can pay your bills. It includes your kids being well and safe.
And you mentioned that you work primarily with women.
I work predominantly with women, and I'm happy to work with anybody who calls me. I offer free comp call, and basically people can just share their situation with me. And if I think that I can be effective with them and get them into a better space, then I'm happy to work with them. So that men and women. I should also say I work with all family configurations, all relationship configurations. And, I have a very inclusive practice. So basically, whoever shows up, he, she, they, and they're in need of support and I can meaningfully support them, then I'm happy to hear from people. At this time, it tends to be women and it tends to be moms.
Let's talk about women then, because this is also who our most of our listeners are. And I want to ask you a question for a woman who is in a relationship. And can you describe with your own words what trauma looks like on a quieter and everyday life?
Trauma can be multiple things. It can be a single event, let's say like an earthquake or a car accident or an assault on the street. It can be a series of events, let's say an abusive relationship in the home. And it can also be more of a circumstance like long-term poverty. So there's different kinds of traumas. We see trauma showing up where it's impacting the body. And so there's often what trauma is around this feeling of helplessness, terror, and powerlessness. And so, what's interesting about trauma is that you and I could have the same experience, and you might be able to shake it off and it doesn't bother you. And it might be a game changer for me, and it might really
Yes.
significantly impact me. So, how everybody responds to trauma is very individuated. And so, but we see trauma, having particular impact on people. And the thing is, often we know that we've had some egregious experience or experience of powerlessness. And sometimes I think for folks, especially around gender-based violence, it's almost like being a lobster in a warm water. You're so enculturated into it that you don't even necessarily register that there's a mass power imbalance or there's a um, major power dynamic issue going on. And so for sometimes it's a matter of like people starting to like come to and gather words and understand, oh, that's been like a significant period of time in a very unhealthy situation. And that's part of why I do holistic work that's wraparound with people, because often we need to look after ourselves fundamentally and improve our relationship with ourselves, and start to digest these experiences. And of course, when we're talking about trauma, and you mentioned this earlier, where we start is setting up the safe container, right? So that's it. The consultation call is just a space to have a early conversation, but in the sessions we start to set up the safe container. And so again, for each person, that's individuated, right? And so I'm not a therapist, but when I do coaching, I'm able to work with people in the present and moving forward. And also, there's some reflecting on the past. So safety is set up like a container. So what happens is we need to feel safe in order to be able to process. And so safety is individuated. So I might feel safe with you in 2 hours, and another person might feel safe after 2 years of relationship. So really it's individuated, and it just depends on the person who's experiencing the safety to determine when they're ready to start processing.
I love everything that you just said because it reminds us again to trust ourselves. Trust
Mhm.
yourself. Trust yourself. Trust yourself. And even if you're just curious to know if your situation is normal or not, just ask, educate yourself, look it up, do something. Don't feel stuck. If you feel something negative, once again, in order to compose that into something positive, you got to be able to identify it and work on it. It can be nothing, it can be something. Um, and trusting yourself is everything. It's funny because the whole education system from childhood until you become an adult at 21, everybody tells you what to do and what you should be doing and how to succeed in life. And then you become this adult and you're like, who's going to tell me what to do now? Oh, I'm free. Okay. Is that what freedom looks like? Awesome. I can do whatever I want. And then at the beginning, it's great. And then it feels like you're left alone and you never learn how to trust yourself, and it feels very, very, very lonely, especially I would say, prior to 30 years old. Really, from 21 to 30 years old, we go through a roller coaster of emotion for that reason, and sometimes we jump into a relationship, picking the person that we're gonna live our life with as a savior, or as a person that reminds us something that is familiar, because once again this environment is safe, and when it's no longer safe, sometimes we forget to question it.
And that's one of the spaces is like, as I work with people in terms of how they communicate with their kids, often we don't want our kids to have the trajectory that we've had. And so, how can we strengthen and embolden our kids? And part of that is like affirming for your kid, like, you make the decision. Like, I trust you. Why don't you go ahead and make the decision? Now, my kid will always choose to get extra ice cream, but also my kid will also choose to do, like an athletic activity, or spend their money on a book. And so then so again, I think a lot of parenting is an invitation to teach negotiation, right? It's like, do you want to spend the $40 on comics that you're going to read in 25 minutes? Or do you want to buy a novel that'll last for 3 days? Or do you want to save your $40 and go to the library? Or do you want to co purchase with a friend? So now you have, double as many books that you can share. Like, so I think often it's like, teaching those early negotiation skills, and that building that self trust. And again, we can affirm for our kids, I trust you. Go ahead and make a decision. And just letting them practice that skill set, because it's better to have a 12-year-old practice that than a 30-year-old for the first time.
Absolutely. And teaching also that failing doesn't make you a failure, right? Encouraging the fact that, oh, you got it wrong, it's fine, try again. And, just feeling comfortable with outcomes.
And the invitation that there's benefit in making mistakes, and to be human is to make mistakes, and that
Absolutely.
what can we learn from those mistakes, and how, when we make a mistake, instead of going back in with that harsh brutality, how when we make a mistake we can befriend ourselves and stand in solidarity with ourselves, and be like, oh, this is a beautiful learning moment, and this is what the takeaway is, and this is how I can implement it. So I work with people a lot around, again, how they build and integrate their relationship with themselves.
And it's exactly true. It's all about saying, all right, it didn't work out. So what did you learn? Right? That is going to improve your next try. Um, is there, regarding the woman you've been working with, is there a moment, an experience, a situation where you had a client and the whole the whole process changed you or taught you something?
The take home for me continuously in the last few years is, I love this line of work. I feel so blessed here. I get to work with so many diverse, spectacular women that are amazing, and they share their lives with me, and I feel so much richer for that. Like, almost sometimes like I'm in awe that this gets to be my beautiful, precious life. So I just live with a lot of gratitude. that people are, spending their time with me, and that they're receiving really beautiful benefit from it, and I receive beautiful benefit from it too.
You're such an inspiring human being, really. I wish more people could be like you. It's including me. It's it's the gratitude you just mentioned. It there is not enough of that in our daily lives. There is way more complaints, and it really comforts me even more was having you here on the podcast and promoting your work to the listeners, because I mean, if they haven't realized by now that you're spectacular and you're such a devoted person, then then I don't know what it takes. But guys, it's incredible that you were willing to be here with us today. I want to thank you for that, and I want to ask you, if somebody is tempted to work with your, what is the first step for somebody who want to start with your program?
I'd love for people to reach out to me for a consultation call. So my website is themothercorp.com. So www.themothercorp.com. And or they can send me an email, which is secure, which is themothercorp@proton.me, which is themothercorp@proton.me. And so people can get in touch with me those ways. And I'm on social media under the Mother Corp. So feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to hear from people. I want to give as much support to people as possible. And I love working with people who are grappling with complexity and want to improve their lives and want support to improve their relationship with themselves and the external world.
Chavisa, if there was one takeaway from our conversation today that you wish people can just keep in mind, what would it be?
Having meaningful support to break down complicated things and chip away at them and achieve them makes a huge difference. And so, we're not going to change from black to white. That's not how it goes. We make 1% incremental shifts. And when we make 16 of them, we've made 16% improvement in our lives. And so to have somebody with you to make those tiny micro shifts and hold space for you and bear witness to you as you're doing that can be very remarkable. All the clients that I work with, I can say, I remember you when, and now you're here. Like, look at how far you've come, and like, look at how beautiful you've done for yourself. That's a real gift.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Chavisa, for being here today with us, taking the time once again to share your wisdom. I wish that everybody at least learned something, because I did. I am beyond thrilled to look at this podcast, and kind of rewind on our conversation, because the way you integrate the healing and the emotional assistance that you provide is science based, and it's structured in such a way that it can work for anybody at any point of their lives.
And this is it. All we get is now, right? So this is the moment where we can make the investment in ourselves right now. It's not yesterday and it's not tomorrow. Today's the day, right? And we can get an enormous amount done. Sara, I just want to thank you because I so appreciate your generous worldview and your thoughtfulness and your reflexiveness in this conversation. It's been really illuminating for me, and I've really enjoyed speaking with you. So thank you for the gift.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you. I'm going to also, guys, if you didn't have a pen and you didn't write anything down, well, Chavisa was sharing her information. Don't worry, because everything will be written in the description down below. So please don't hesitate to take the shot and talk to Chavisa. It's a transformative experience. Thank you, Chavisa, for today. Thank you very much again.
Thanks, Sara. Take care of yourself.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode. Until next time, stay bold, stay brilliant, and keep building your own success story. If you loved what you heard, be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this episode with someone who needs to hear it.